This is the first day of class, and it's the electronic version of estate planning. So this is the first time I've actually ever taught an online course. So we're going to try our best and make our way through it with the limitations and advantages of the medium that we have. So I'm actually going to periodically take out my earpiece if I get a little bit of feedback, but we'll try our best. So starting off, everyone can hear me well. There's no problem there. Great, great. And then everyone can see the slides. Yes, that's the one. Great, great, good. So we should all be on the same page literally. So we're going to get started, and we're just going to go slide by slide here. And what it will see as we go through, we'll get more and more comfortable with the medium as we give it a try. So first, an introduction to me, and then I'll go around and ask some introductions for you. So I'm Mike Lee. I'm an attorney and counselor of law. So I'm licensed by the state of California. That's my home jurisdiction. That's the jurisdiction that I've been licensed for the longest time, and where the majority of my practice is. I'm also licensed in the District of Columbia and the state of Wyoming. So I do a fairly significant trust practice and trust administration practice out of the state of Wyoming. As we'll see regarding trust law and the law of complex taxation, we're going to find that Wyoming is a fairly attractive state for some planning. But that's a sophisticated level of planning that we'll get to later. In addition to estate planning and the estate practice that I have, I also am a bar certified specialist in bankruptcy law, which you may find a little bit odd, these two things put together, but actually, with a little bit of legal history, the law of probate and the law of trust administration is where the law of bankruptcy originated. And historically, in the courts of England, the Chancery Court, the administration of estates of the dead and the administration of insolvent companies or insolvent persons was done through the same court, the Chancery Court. So lo and behold, there is a connection to this. It's also an essential for what we will talk about a little bit later is the law of asset protection. And debtor-creditor rights. Does a trust or does some transfer or transfer to a business entity actually prevent the attachment by creditors of the asset, or does it not actually function? Can it be reversed, or can the asset be obtained through piercing the trust, an alter ego theory, on and on? So those are the states that I've licensed. I also practiced in the state of Nevada, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So currently, I'm in private practice, RUI attorneys. We've been practicing for a good number of years. I've been practicing myself over 10 years. Prior experience to that, I was an assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Nevada for tax prosecutions. So I used to do criminal tax. I also did bankruptcy when I was with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I also worked at the Internal Revenue Service General Counsel's Office. So I was an IRS General Counsel for the LMSB group, which is the large and medium-sized business group in San Jose. And then prior to that, I did work in the quote-unquote white shoe law firms, which is good experience, but needless to say, I did not remain working there for long. There's a grind to it. So that's a little bit about me, about my experience. Regarding this particular class, I would say estate planning and this area of work is probably about 50% of my practice. The other practice is bankruptcy, debtor-creditor rights, and reorganization of companies. So we practice kind of different sides in different areas there. So I'm going to turn this over to you and seek input from you. Is that I'd like to know a little bit about you, and I have some things here that I'm interested in, and so we can get to know each other, a little bit about your intellectual or your academic background, your work experience. Where did you attend undergraduate law school or undergraduate? Did you attend law school anywhere else, or is Lincoln your first experience? Why did you choose this course? That's actually the most important for me, is what are you interested in to get from this course, because we can tailor the course and try to guide our discussion towards things that you are interested in. Because this practice area, like a lot of practice areas, is very diverse, and there are some things that perhaps we're not interested in. And then there are other things that we say, actually, this I'm very interested in, let's spend some time on it. So we can tailor it. The other thing is, you may not be focused on this particular area of law. What other areas of law are you interested in? This area tends to intersect with a lot of other areas, because the law of, let's say, marital law, family law, that's an essential part of estate planning. 95% of your clients are going to have some sort of family relationship that they're going to want to deal with. Spouses, children, stepchildren, brothers and sisters, parents, all of these things. You very rarely have the lone and alone orphan who wants estate planning. They want to accomplish something, so you're going to have family law issues. You're going to have business law issues, is very common. So you're going to have to be aware of the law of business entities, how businesses operate. You're going to have, unfortunately, unless that's your thing, there's a lot of taxation involved. So that's a fairly significant area. And any variety of everything else. So the other thing I'd also like to understand, and we can talk about a little bit more, is a little bit just about you personally, any hobbies that you're interested in, volunteer work, that sort of thing. And then I always throw in a joke, if you'd like to send your date of birth, social security number, and mother's maiden name, you could also let me know that too, and we'll see what happens from there. So I'm going to turn it over to you and learn a little bit about you, and then we'll come back and you can ask some questions about me, a little bit about my background, and we can go from there. So let's see, we have kind of when we're in the room, I can kind of point and look at somebody. You can't really tell who I'm looking at here. So feel free, anyone just chime in and tell a little bit about yourself. Perfect. That's really what we're trying to do with this course, and we'll have talk about what the course is and what the course isn't. But this is really the intent of the course. Is we're not trying to substitute your wills and trusts course. We're trying to supplement it and really try to give you something more practical. Are we going to spend a whole class on the anti-lapse statute, on the rule against perpetuities? No, we're just going to say draft documents that don't have lapses, draft documents that don't violate the rule against perpetuities. And that's going to be much more practical for your general practice, and likely will be helpful on the bar because you will have seen this more than once. So you'll have some familiarity with these things in another context besides just the will and trust class that's going to be fairly technical on the probate code. So who else? Let's have at. Well, perfect. That's actually a great segue. And there'll be a perfect class over, I believe, our fourth class will be regarding the irrevocable life insurance trust, as you're likely familiar with. That's a good way to get our feet wet in the irrevocable trust and all the tax implications and the fact that it becomes a locked box with certain rights that have been sort of given over to the trustee. So perfect segue. And the other interesting thing, like with this class, is that we'll be seeing the practical side of estate planning of preparing wills, trusts, powers of attorney, advanced healthcare directives. And then the funny thing with this class, this is the attorney as counselor. So we want to be as far away as litigation as we possibly can because our client doesn't want that. In fact, our client, that's the biggest fear, that the estate will end up in litigation. So if something you draft ends up being, down on 191 North First Street in the probate court, something horrible has gone wrong, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to produce something fairly airtight, fairly predictable, and has dispute resolution provisions that bypass having to seek court intervention. Naturally, it's going to happen. We're going to start to get a read of what parts are going to produce litigation, but that's sort of the direction that we're going to go. So perfect. Who would like to have that? Well, perfect. That's actually exactly what I was trying to do when I was designing this course. Is that and I'm sure many of your colleagues will have had the same experience. When you take contracts and torts and certainly criminal law, the case book is designed to prepare you to be an appellate law lawyer, to have the trials already done, and there are these nuanced areas of law and issues of law that you're going to argue before a court of appeal. Needless to say, in real life, a handful of people do that. Appeals law is a very narrow specialty. Most people are like me, that are trench lawyers that deal with clients and deal with practical issues. And people don't want a nuanced legal argument, they want a solution. And that's what we're trying to provide here. Is we're not going to delve into the probate code. We are going to play around with a couple of cases, but I don't really care whether you read them or not. We're going to give a summary, and we're just going to have a rule about it and try to learn from that. And what we're also going to try to do is look at real documents. So like for wills, we're going to look at a model template will. That's a very well-known sample will, and say, how do you read this thing? So when you get a will, when you're in practice, and there's a will, what's the construction? Why is it in the order that it's in? What should be in there? What shouldn't be in there? And try to have something a little bit more practical than these sort of intractable appeals cases that are against each other, like you see in criminal law. We're going to try to avoid that because we want something that when you exit, you say, okay, I think I can quickly identify will, trust, power of attorney, healthcare directive, what they are, what they're for, what's in there, and go from there as a lawyer. And then we'll have some warnings and caveats, of course, but that'll get us started. So great. Next. Fantastic. This is a very practical area for individual or small practice. In fact, it's traditionally practiced out of a small practice. Like Jenny was talking about, major commercial litigation, some scale of that is done out of a very large commercial practice. So like when I started in sort of the quote unquote big law, I did maritime insurance. Maritime insurance is practiced out of gigantic law firms because there's only like 8 major maritime insurers and the claims are gigantic. So they just hire a handful of law firms. And then the funny thing is, it's all arbitrated. So there's actually no courtroom part. You have a private judge, sometimes 3 private judges. You have the multiple insurance companies. You argue it out, and then you get an arbitral award, and then you just pay it and you move on. So it's kind of different in that it makes good big law, but then there's no possible way you could practice it, on the small scale and say, oh, Mike Lee, maritime insurance arbitrator, you're not going to have a lot of business because there's no clients. So this one can be something one thinks about of saying maybe this may make a practice. So great. Well, perfect. That should, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We should be able to give you an orientation of what these things are and what to look for and how they operate. So perfect. Great. good. That's exactly what we hope to aim this at. And yet, actually, a lot of the Wyoming practice is regarding asset protection, and there's some valuable parts and some parts that are unsettled under the law. So we'll take a look at some of those things. So great. What's actually interesting, and an area that we practice and comes up a lot, which may interest you, and this the whole point of the course, introduce you to new things. One area that is very it's an expanding area because people are aging, and unfortunately they are often not planning, is the area of law called conservatorship. Someone did not actually do a plan, and now they have lost capacity, and because of the loss of capacity, we cannot do a will. We cannot do a trust. We cannot do a power of attorney healthcare directive because they cannot meaningfully understand how they work. They can't instruct the lawyer. They don't have capacity. And that area is very popular for people who are interested in psychology or psychiatry, elder law, that area, because part of the petition regarding conservatorship is the medical condition that they have that causes them not to have capacity, and does that render them to such a state that the court can appoint a conservator. So do they have dementia? Do they have diagnosed Alzheimer's? Do they have dementia with what's called Lewy bodies? So there's a whole area of law of when they did an MRI, are there lesions on the brain that indicate there's severe dementia, on and on and on, where you as the lawyer do have to have some medical understanding, some psychological understanding, so that you can present the facts to the court in a way that is clear, logical, and persuasive, where you just, if you just walk in and say, grandma kind of forgets things and wanders around a lot, we're not going to take away someone's civil rights from that. We need a lot more, and we need an explanation, and that's going to be, again, I think what you all see in law is there's being the lawyer knowing the law, and then there's being the lawyer knowing the facts. And actually this, we're going to talk about being the lawyer who's actually not purely advocate, the lawyer who's counselor, and then the lawyer who's counselor who also has to understand facts, also has to understand how to guide clients about these issues. So if you like things like that, this area may have things that spark your interest. So great, great. Let's see. Well, perfect, perfect. And actually, I'm hearing a lot of interest in corporate law and business law, and that's actually also a huge area of estate planning, it's going to be a little bit outside what we probably are going to focus on, but highly sophisticated estate planning generally is going to be a structure that mixes wills, trusts, structures inside trusts like powers of appointment, divisions of trust into sort of the A share, B share, C share. Basically what that's saying is husband share, wife share, and the marital bypass. And then more sophisticated structures where underneath this you may have a family limited partnership or a family limited LLC, which is actually the repository of the assets that's underneath the trust. And then over time, you gift fractions of this, the limited shares, to the children or the next generation. And you use a tax structure by saying that basically that should be valued less than the pure liquidation value. This is an estate tax technique. And the reason it's worth less is because you have to deal with dad and deal with grandpa, who are the general partners, and you have a limited partnership interest that's required to not be liquidated for 25 years. And then, of course, the argument is that that's not worth, let's say if it's 20% of the company, that's not worth 20% of the company. Because with the 25-year restriction, dealing with people you don't know, your inability to manage, it's a limited partnership, that actually this thing should be worth maybe 30 or 40% less. So then when I gift it, I'm going to gift a lower value. And again, when we'll have a class regarding the estate tax, and I'm trying to get things out of my gross estate, that's a fairly sophisticated technique. So we're blending the business law, and we're using all of that entity choice. Are we using a corporation, an LLC, a limited partnership? Are we using an S Corp, a C Corp? How are we going to structure it? Are we going to have it with, dad and grandpa, mom and grandma, they're the board, and then we're going to have the kids as owner? The sky's the limit on these things, but you can see a merge of the two classes coming together where actually you use your business entity knowledge, you use your estate planning knowledge, and then generally an overlay of the taxation, and say, how do we put this puzzle together so that we get the optimum outcome? And we'll see, we'll brush on them. Some of these structures are shockingly complex, how you do them, and oftentimes they take many years to pull off. But it will give you at least a taste of what's out there and what you can eventually do after you have some time and experience in it. So we'll move right along. Oh, and before we move right along, any questions that you have for me? I'm not that interesting, so perhaps not. Generally, yes. That preparing estate planning documents like wills, trusts, powers of attorney, healthcare directives is likely to be construed the practice of law if you are doing it for compensation. So I would be cautious about holding yourself out on this. That being said, someone is completely free to do their own will or trust or et cetera, et cetera. And if you provide, tips, let's say to a family member, that's not going to be so serious. But holding yourself out for compensation, that's going to be a problem. That's unauthorized practice of law. And, if you're aiming to seek admission to the California State Bar, that's going to be a problem. So I'd wait the year or two until you get admitted, and then you can do it as much as you like. So that would be my tip. Any other questions? Great. So we'll move right along and talk a little bit about what this course is, and we hit on it while we were doing our introductions. So first thing that we're going to talk about today, and it's going to be kind of a theme through our course, is this role of attorney as counselor rather than advocate. And of course, hopefully, if you wish to be admitted to the bar, you'll receive your bar license and it will say attorney and counselor at law, which is the dual role. The one role is to be the advocate, and that's, I think, is the contracts courses and torts courses are the attorney as the advocate. The attorney, you push this position to the confines of the sort of limits of the law, the limit of ethics, to advocate to get the best outcome for your client, which is sometimes Pareto efficient. And Pareto efficient is, I win, you lose. In estate planning, that role is very different. And we'll talk about that you're going to be a counselor. You generally are not going to want Pareto efficient outcomes. We don't, very few families approach you and say, I want to make sure certain people lose out. You're going to see it, but most of the time people are going to want an efficient situation, and you have to counsel more holistically than raw, pure advocate. The other thing we're going to talk about is comparison of, and this we use a little bit broadly, comparison of intestate succession versus testate succession. And I would like to actually kind of put an asterisk on testate succession. By testate succession, we don't mean just having a will. We really mean planned succession, that there is a plan, there's an estate plan for incapacity, for death, for assets, of how assets and powers go from generation A to generation B, when, in what form. So we're really going to try to compare what happens when you do nothing, or you do something that's kind of holly-hobby and all over the place, or you do something where you actually thought this through very carefully, and it really should look like a house of cards getting knocked down, that you sort of push one and it should gently collapse into the box. That's what you're hoping for, without litigation. If it explodes with cards everywhere, that's not a great outcome. That also wasn't good planning. So what we'll also do is do an introduction, and we'll have really kind of a course on wills, trusts, and then a combined one, powers of attorney and healthcare directives. And of course, we'll introduce what the documents are, and we will spend a fair amount of time actually looking at the thing. It's kind of funny. I remember taking contracts, 12, 13 years ago. I don't think we ever really looked at a contract. We never actually went through, how do I do this and not end up like in this book? That's basically what I thought of, like with torts and contracts and all these cases. How do I end up not in this book? Because I want something that's going to be practical, and the person's going to do what they say and pay me on time. I don't want I don't want something that an appellate court judge says, wow, this is a really interesting legal issue. I'm going to have to ask other judges and lawyers what to do. I don't ever want to see that. I joke with my clients. I say, when we do estate planning, wills and trusts, I don't want to draft anything that a judge is going to say, I've never seen this before. We want to go the road that everybody goes. Of course, our clients are going to present us curveballs in different situations. And then that's our job to develop sophistication, how we can take these unusual situations and make it predictable. And a big part of our role is to take chaos and create order. The other thing that we'll do in this class, that I used this word fairly accurately, we're going to glance very briefly and quickly at the federal estate tax, the gift tax, and the generation skipping transfer tax, a little bit on the taxation of trusts, the fancy word is called non-conduit entities, and a little bit of California property tax. We're literally going to glance in the general direction of it and then move away. The problem is because it is so complicated that we really just don't want to get stuck in the weeds on that, because we'll see in a moment why. So that's what our course is we're going to try to talk about our role, conceive of it that way. And most of, after listening to everybody, everyone I think has some interest, a little bit of interest in practice, or at least knowing about this. So I think spending some time on that makes sense. And then of course talk about planned succession, what the documents are, what the structures are, and then a little bit about the tax. So what is our course not? What are we not going to do? So this is not a substitute, like I said, for the wills and trust course. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the probate code. I gave you citations to the probate code so you can take a peek, but we're not going to be really analyzing these statutes because, again, this is assuming you've already done that or you're going to do that, and really you're going to be thinking about, and what I want everyone to be thinking about in this class is the plan. Who are the players? What are they trying to do? What things do they have? Where are they trying to get it to go? That's what's important to us. Like I said, things like the anti-lapse statute, we're going to draft where we say, to Betty and her heirs, or, and then we'll take care of it. There's no lapse. Or we're going to have something in the will or the trust that basically says all provisions shall be interpreted without reference to the anti-lapse statute. Boom. Done. We're going to get away from that. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to do. So we're focusing on the plan. We're also not going to focus very much on procedure or estate administration. So we're not really going to talk about how you actually implement these documents through probate or trust administration, because again, we care about the setup. We'll talk about how probate works a little bit, how estate administration works a little bit, but not in depth, because again, we're trying to do the plan. And like I said, glance at taxation for this, because the best example that I could give on this is that NYU has their very famous LLM program in taxation. They have a practicum on trust and estates taxation, and it's literally 8 courses full-time over a year. So this could not be more complicated, and this is someone who's dedicating a year of their life to just the taxation part. We're going to skim it, and basically what we're going to try to find is where are the rocks on the coast, where to steer clear, where's the problem, and then like most things, if you encounter that issue in practice, you hire a specialist, you co-counsel with a specialist to do it, which is very, very common. So what you'll need for this course and how to be successful in the course. So I think it's most enjoyable that we have some participation and a good attitude. We're on Zoom. I'm sort of looking at you through, I'm in a room alone with sort of a blue light and your faces on the camera, and you have me, I think, in the screen. We're going to have to try to overcome this distance of the medium. But it's the way of the world, so that's what we're going to do. The other thing is this works a lot better if we have a sense of humor. And like I put in the slide, this class is literally about death and taxes. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about death, incapacity, and taxes. So it's a little bit of a heavy topic, and it's an area that with a little bit of levity, I think it's going to make it more interesting. Also, it makes it more fun as a class just in general. The other thing that will make this more enjoyable, and I think that we can have some fun with it, is an interest in how things work and why. If you like kind of setting up structures, or I heard a lot of people mention they were interested in the business entities course. If you like that, this is going to be very similar. You're doing the same thing, but what's more practical about this is applicable to everybody. You maybe have seen something about the limited partnership. You probably don't have too many people in your life that are super interested in the limited partnership. Anybody who's in California is going to be interested in a will or a trust. Everybody living is going to be interested in a power of attorney or healthcare directive. This is just tools for life. So these things are going to be pretty broadly applicable. So if you have interest in that, that'll be great. And as I say, the text, there's no required book for this. My recommendation for when you're curious about things is California Wills and Trust by Hertog. That's a great practice treatise in this area. And it's also, I recommend taking a look at it, because unlike, I'm not sure how much work you've done, outside of law school. I know many of you work as paralegals and in the legal field. Getting used to the practice guide is also a very good skill. Because again, needless to say, when you're in practice, reading case books, percentage of your time is 0. No one does this. You look at the practice guides, you then read cases, or you'll read statutes. Generally in wills and trusts, you'll be reading statutes, and then you'll be using an annotated code to check the statutes, which is pretty common. But practice guides are ubiquitous because, again, you don't want to do something that has not been seen necessarily, because, again, you're going to be the first one. That's a little iffy. And then, California Probate Code, it's there if it happens to come up. So that is what you'll need. So we're going to start the sort of meat of today, attorney and counselor at law, and the introduction there. So I don't know if you've seen the movie Pulp Fiction. My favorite character from Pulp Fiction, Winston Wolfe, he basically in the scene from Pulp Fiction teaches you everything that you need to know to be a good planning or transactional lawyer. So we're going to take a look at Winston Wolfe. Pay attention to his sort of the way about him, because we're going to use that and apply that for how to be a good transactional planning lawyer. Also, fair warning, it's Quentin Tarantino. If you have children around, you may need to mute this. For obvious reasons, it has some language to it, but we're adults here, so we're going to give it a go. So I'm going to cue up the video and let us have at it.
Yeah, please do. You must be Jules. Should make you Vincent. Let's get down to brass tacks, gentlemen. If I was informed correctly, the clock is ticking. Is that right, Jimmy? 100%. Your wife? Bonnie comes home at 9:30 in the a.m. Is that correct? I was led to believe if she comes home and finds us here, she won't appreciate them too much. We wanted that. All right, that gives us 40 minutes to get the fuck out of Dodge. Which, if you do what I say, when I say, it should be plenty. Now, you got a corpse in a car, minus a head in a garage. Take me to it. Jimmy. Do me a favor, will you? Let's put some coffee back there. Would you make me a cup? Yeah, sure. Oh, how do you take it? Lots of cream, lots of sugar. About the car, is there anything I need to know? Does it stall? Does it smoke? Does it make a lot of noise? Is there gas? Is there anything? Aside from how it looks, the car's cool. Positive. Don't get me out there on the road, I find out the brake lights don't work. Hey, man, as far as I know, the motherfucker's tip-top. Let's go back to the kitchen. Here you go, Mr. Wolfe. Thank you, Jimmy. Okay, first thing, you two. Take the body, stick it in the trunk. Now, Jimmy, this looks to be a pretty domesticated house. That would lead me to believe that in the garage, you're under the seats, you got a bunch of cleaners and cleansers and shit like that? Yeah, Mr. Wolfe, under the sink. Good. I need you two fellas to do is take those cleaning products and clean the inside of the car. I'm talking fast, fast, fast. You need to go in the back seat, scoop up all those little pieces of brain and skull. Get it out of there. Wipe down the upholstery. Now, when it comes to upholstery, you don't need to be spick and span. You don't need to eat off it. Just give it a good once-over. What you need to take care of are the really messy parts. The pools of blood that I've collected, you gotta soak that shit up. Now, Jimmy, we need to read your linen closet. I need blankets, I need comforters, I need quilts, I need bedspreads. Thicker the better, the darker the better. No whites. Can't use them. We need to camouflage the interior of the car. We're gonna line the front seat and the back seat and the floorboards with quilts and blankets. So if a cop stops us and starts sticking his big snout in the car, the subterfuge won't last. At a glance, the car will appear to be normal. Jimmy, lead the way. Boys, get to work. Please would be nice. Come again? I said a please would be nice. Get it straight, Buster. I'm not here to say please. I'm here to tell you what to do. And if self-preservation is an instinct you possess, you better fucking do it and do it quick. I'm here to help. If my help's not appreciated, lots of luck, gentlemen.
No, Mr. Wolfe. It ain't like that. Your help is definitely appreciated.
Mr. Wolfe, listen. I don't mean disrespect, okay? I respect you. I just don't like people barking orders at me, that's all. I'm curt with you is because time is a factor. I think fast, I talk fast, and I need you guys to act fast if you want to get out of this. So, pretty please, with sugar on top, clean the fucking car. Don't be looking at me like that, all right? I can feel your look.
All right. We'll switch over. you know what we'll do? Let's take a quick break. We'll come back in about, how about 7:45. Let me get it going again. That'll be just a better use of our time. So let's do that. Let's log off and then come back at 7:45.